All right, back on the conversation. Andy Hirschfeld joins us. He's an investigative reporter, and he did a piece for TYT Investigates, and it was about Steny Hoyer and Wall Street evictions, and of course, House leadership overall. Andy, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So, let's break down this eviction moratorium issue. So, who was stopping the evictions in the first place? And then what happened? And then we'll break down why it happened.
Well, so it was really the CDC. The CDC was the one, the group that was kind of standing in the way, that was making sure that this was not happening. And it was up to states to really enforce that. And the problem that we saw really across the board is that courts were interpreting this differently. So some states were kind of actively defying it. They were saying they're not going to follow what the CDC says. Other states were doing things like moving forward with evictions up to the point of actually kicking someone out of their homes. In Mississippi, for example, right now, they have a one-day kind of notice situation. So it really kind of varies from place to place.
So they got all this money that they allocated. It hasn't gotten to the people that it needs to get to because of the states. And the CDC maintains a moratorium, so you can't kick them out, although some do anyway. And then the moratorium runs out. Cori Bush obviously does her protest. And then Biden is forced to say, oh, golly gee, we have no legal authority to do this, courts. Make sure you do something about it. And then turns around and the courts do say, no, Congress has to pass it. And now the Democrats don't look like they're really going to pass anything in the House, which then leads to the question of why. So what did you find out about Steny Hoyer, who's the #2 Democrat in the House, that might question his motives a little bit?
He's taking money from a lot of different parties within the election cycle. He took a lot of money from a lot of different parties that have a vested interest in the eviction, in making sure the eviction moratorium expires. Whether it's people who own, who are institutional investors buying up real estate within the rental market, whether it's the companies that are involved with building new homes in neighborhoods that will now have the ability to bar these very people that have been kicked out of their homes from getting a new place to live.
So for the uninitiated, this is all perfectly legal in American politics, right? Taking money from real estate interests and then doing whatever they want and evicting their tenants.
Well, yes, I mean, there are these PACs, like the Carlyle Group has their own PAC that they will then funnel and donate to politicians that they believe have their best interest at heart. For example, in the latest report, Steny Hoyer, Goldman Sachs, Vanguard, all of these other groups, Carlyle, their various PACs donated to Steny Hoyer in part for that reason. So.
Yeah, so I just want to jump in there for a second. You asked Steny Hoyer's office for a comment, and if they had a good reason to take the money from the Vanguards and the Goldman Sachs, and in your report, you explained that Steny Hoyer's been taking $5,000 from Goldman Sachs every year since 2007. Well, they'd have a perfect opportunity to tell you, oh no, they were doing it for charity and it had nothing to do with the real estate interest. So was it for charity? Did they answer you?
No, they didn't really respond.
Huh, interesting. I wonder if Goldman Sachs is giving the money to Steny Hoyer all those years to make money off of him because they think he's corrupt and will do whatever they tell him to do. Is that a possibility, Andy?
That is absolutely a possibility. And if they wanted to clear the record, they could have responded to our inquiries for comment. They could have made it clear what their position is and why, in fact, they were taking that money. But they didn't. Maybe they had a defense. Maybe they had a good defense. but they didn't put it out there on the table.
So Marcus and Millichap gave $1 million, the real estate company, gave $1 million to the House Majority PAC in June. I mean, this is absurd. I mean, between your reporting on the money that Steny Hoyer is taking clearly from real estate interests related companies, right? And these guys, let alone, by the way, millions of dollars have come in through all these different companies at different times. But the one in June especially, it removes any doubt as to what's going on. So, Andy, I'm gonna ask you a question. I know that you can't answer, but do the Democrats ever give a reason? They didn't ask, Hoyer's office didn't respond to you. Pelosi's office has not responded when she's asked. Does Democratic leadership ever say why they take the money and why we're supposed to believe them that those millions of dollars don't influence their decisions?
Well, I don't really think there is a good answer to that. I guess you could say the beauty of a company like Goldman Sachs is that they have their hands in so many different areas. So they could say, oh, they may not be great in this space, but they're okay in this space. Or, they're not good in this space, but they're okay in this space. But again, this is why politicians should respond to reporter inquiries for these things. They can answer those questions.
Yeah, and you worked at a lot of different places: Fortune, ABC News, Aussie Observer, CNBC, et cetera. You've done pieces for them, and I'm curious about the rest of the media. I don't know that this is a fair question to you, but do they find it perfectly normal, this kind of corruption? Like that's, Steny Hoyer takes money from real estate companies, well, and then he votes with them. Well, of course, like. Do they think that everybody in America knows the corruption, or they think the corruption is not a big deal?
Well, I guess I'm not in a position to speak for other publications and other publishers and other outlets for their editorial decisions. But there's these companies are so huge that there has to be, at some level, some kind of vested interest. I wouldn't say that's coming from an editorial decision, but that could be something that could come from like upper level management.
See, that was kind of an unfair question, Andy. Of course, you can't speak for all those folks, and he answered it anyway. You see, it wasn't that hard. Steny Hoyer, even if he thought your questions were unfair, could have answered it and could have given a fair answer like you did. Anyways, so you mentioned someone challenging Hoyer at the end of the article. Who is that, and then how do you think that plays out? Whether this will affect that race?
So Steny Hoyer has a progressive challenger, Michaela Wiggs, and she is essentially, she ran for his seat in the last election. She did not end up winning that seat, but as soon as this election ended, she decided, hey, I'm gonna jump back into the race again, and she managed to really pick up some momentum here. She has people starting to volunteer for this campaign that started like immediately after this past election cycle. It's one thing when people are excited about an election, when the election cycle is really starting to ramp up and all kinds of people are throwing their hats into the ring. And it's another when it's immediately after this takes shape. And we've seen elections like this across the country. We famously the election that prompted AOC's career, for example. There are many examples like that and across the country that we could really look at.
Yeah. So by the way, guys, we're gonna put the link to Andy's piece down below if you're watching later on YouTube or Facebook. Please read it. It's got great details on all the money that Hoyer took from all these different companies that are related. Now, I want to ask you, Andy, is it basically too late here? Even if they fix it now afterwards, have people already been evicted or no?
In some places, yes. As I mentioned, in Mississippi, for example, they have a law where somebody could be locked out of their apartment in the same day. Once a judge orders that. I live in New York City. In New York City, the protections for renters are, in the great scheme of things, pretty good. It can take up to a year of appeals and things like that to kick someone out. So there's a broad spectrum of what can happen to people. And as we've seen in some of these more Republican led states, that they move a little faster with these processes. And that's kind of what we're looking at. The other thing, and I just want to point out that was telling from Steny Hoyer, is in a statement that he put out publicly, he equated renters and landlords and the welfare of those two groups of people. And that was particularly interesting to me.
Yeah, Andy, real quick, I got the sense from that quote, I'm glad you brought that up, that he was saying, oh yeah, I'm for the renters if you're my voter, but landlords, I'm going to be pretty brazen and tell you, keep that money flowing because I'm actually for you. He seemed to want to have his cake and eat it too.
Well, there's two aspects here. There is obviously an issue and a problem facing small mom and pop landlords. But at the end of the day, there are things that they can do to cover some of those losses. They have other assets that they can wage against to help their situation. Higher interest rates, things of that nature. If they're paying for things like water or power, for example, they can work with the companies to have a payment plan to deal with back payments. When it comes to renters, they don't have those kinds of protections. They're relying on, the goodness of their landlord, which in a lot of cases is just not a thing. So the problems facing landlords, is kind of these mom and pop landlords is a challenge. But there is a cushion for them. When it comes to renters, a lot of people are renting because they don't have the income or the credit to be able to buy themselves. So for renters, this is can I keep a roof over my head or not? For landlords, it's a income stream. Right. And I think it's kind of telling that he equated the two as an equal situation.
Yeah, it's definitely telling. He was signaling the donors, I got you, keep sending the money. And voters, sure, I'm for the renters, wink. And that's how politics works. Andy Hirschfeld, thank you, brother. Great piece in TYT Investigates, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.